Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Infidelity Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now let's dive into today's story. The clink of champagne glasses echoed through the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel as Seattle's autumn rain tapped against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Jonathan Carlson stood at the edge of the crowd, his tall frame cutting an impressive figure in his charcoal Armani suit. At 45, his dark hair had just started graying at the temples, lending him the distinguished air that helped separate millions from wealthy donors' wallets. $2.3 million, Kelly Dyer announced, approaching with a tablet displaying the evening's totals. The Salmon Breeding Grounds Initiative is fully funded, Mr. Carlson. Jonathan allowed himself a small smile. The salmon, thank you, Kelly. And please, after 5 years, it's Jonathan. Old habits. She glanced across the room. Mrs. Carlson seems to be enjoying herself. Sarah worked the room like the experienced real estate agent she was, her emerald dress catching the light as she laughed with a cluster of potential donors. 20 years of marriage had done nothing to dim her beauty, though lately, Jonathan had noticed something harder in her smile, something calculating. To Jonathan Carlson, Wayne Walls raised his glass, commanding the room's attention. The man who turned tree-hugging into an art form. When we met at Harvard Law, who'd have thought you'd trade corporate litigation for salmon-spawning grounds? The assembled guests laughed appreciatively. Wayne, ever the showman in his tailored tuxedo, had always known how to work a crowd. As Jonathan's best friend and the trust's attorney, he'd helped build the Pacific Northwest Wildlife Trust from a local nonprofit into a conservation powerhouse. The salmon are better clients than corporations, Jonathan replied, earning another round of laughter. They never complain about their billing hours. Brad Rubio materialized at the bar, his brother-in-law's perpetual smirk firmly in place. They don't pay as well either, he signaled the bartender. But I've got to admit, Jonathan, you've proven me wrong. When Sarah told me you were leaving Simpson and Wallace to save fish, I thought she'd married an idealistic fool. The trust fund babies at Simpson and Wallace are the fools, Brad. Jonathan sipped his champagne. They're still pushing paper while I'm preserving ecosystems for their grandchildren. Their modest but comfortable home in Madison Park stood as testament to Jonathan's principles. While his former law school classmates bought mansions and sports cars, he'd chosen a 4-bedroom Craftsman with a view of Lake Washington. It was enough to provide Martha with stability and an excellent education, without the ostentation that often corrupted children of successful parents. Speaking of the next generation, Brad continued, Martha's college application's going well? She's taking a gap year. A new voice joined them. Sarah slipped her arm through Jonathan's, her perfume carrying a hint of something unfamiliar. Time to explore her options. Jonathan frowned. First I'm hearing of this. Last week she was excited about UW's environmental science program. A mother knows these things, darling. Sarah's laugh tinkled like ice in a glass. She's young. Let her find her path. Wayne joined their circle, his bow tie slightly askew. The trust could use an intern next summer if Martha's interested. Get her feet wet in the family business. I thought you were helping her look at our programs, Brad interjected, then quickly added, since she's so talented with photography. Jonathan filed away the contradiction, noting how Sarah's fingers tightened on his arm. Before he could probe further, Kelly appeared with a catering invoice requiring his signature. The crowd thinned as midnight approached. Jonathan found himself alone on the hotel's terrace, watching Seattle's skyline shimmer through the rain. The Space Needle stood like an exclamation point, punctuating his success story. Quite a view. Wayne's voice carried from the doorway. Remember that dump of an office we started in? Look at us now. Us. Jonathan kept his tone light. I remember you thought I was crazy to take this on. Ancient history. Wayne joined him at the railing. Sarah always believed in you, though. Even when the trust was hemorrhaging money that first year, she's always been supportive. Jonathan watched Wayne's reflection in the window. How's the Chicago developer deal going? Brad mentioned something about lakefront property. A flicker of tension crossed Wayne's face. You know how these deals are. Preliminary stages. I don't actually. Sarah hasn't mentioned the details. Mr. Carlson? Kelly's voice saved Wayne from responding. Your car is ready. The drive home was quiet. Sarah focused on her phone. Jonathan noticed how she angled the screen away from him, her perfectly manicured nails tapping out messages to unknown recipients. Their house sat dark except for Martha's bedroom window. The motion sensor lights clicked on as they approached, illuminating the carefully maintained garden where Sarah used to spend her weekends. Lately, the roses had begun to wilt. Inside, Martha's music throbbed through her closed door. Jonathan hung his coat in the closet, noting the empty hanger where Sarah's favorite winter coat should have been. The one she claimed was stolen last month. Successful evening, Sarah said, slipping off her heels. Wayne certainly knows how to charm the donors. He's at practice. Jonathan loosened his tie. I'm going to check some emails before bed. Don't stay up too late. You have that meeting with the state wildlife commissioner tomorrow. Jonathan watched her climb the stairs, remembering how they used to end every fundraiser by sharing a glass of wine in the kitchen, planning their next conservation victory. Now she disappeared into her separate world, leaving him to wonder when exactly his perfect life had started showing its cracks. Monday morning dawned gray and hostile, matching Jonathan's mood as he reviewed the trust's quarterly financials. Something wasn't adding up, literally. Small discrepancies peppered the accounts, none large enough to trigger automatic alerts, but forming a pattern to the trained eye. The board meeting started at 9 sharp in the trust's downtown Seattle office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of Elliott Bay, where cargo ships crawled across the horizon like water striders. Jonathan had chosen this location specifically, a constant reminder of the delicate balance between commerce and conservation. The Salmon Breeding Grounds Initiative is ready for Phase 2, Wayne announced, clicking through his presentation. I recommend setting up a separate account for related expenses. More transparent for the donors. Kelly shifted in her seat. Our current structure has worked fine for similar projects. Why change now? Better safe than sorry. Wayne's smile didn't reach his eyes. Jonathan, you trust my judgment on this, right? Before Jonathan could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, lunch today? Have exciting news about a Chicago property. Mr. Carlson? Wayne pressed. About the new account? Table it for now. Jonathan set down his phone. I want to review the specifics first. The meeting dragged on, Wayne checking his phone with increasing frequency. Jonathan caught Kelly watching these movements, her expression troubled. When Wayne excused himself to take a call, Jonathan noticed how he angled away from the glass walls, his free hand gesturing emphatically. After the meeting, Kelly lingered behind. She'd been with the trust for 5 years, rising from grant writer to COO through sheer competence. Jonathan had come to rely on her attention to detail. Something on your mind, Kelly? She clutched her tablet like a shield. It's about Mrs. Carlson and Mr. Walls. Go on. Last month, during your trip to the Olympic Peninsula Preserve, she faltered. I saw them at Camless. It wasn't a business dinner. How do you know? The way they... Kelly's cheeks flushed. It wasn't professional, and there have been other meetings, not on any calendar. Mr. Walls has been accessing financial records at odd hours, usually when you're traveling. Jonathan leaned back, steepling his fingers. Thank you, Kelly. Please keep this between us. Of course. She paused at the door. Mr. Carlson? The salmon aren't the only ones worth protecting. That evening, Jonathan arrived home earlier than usual. Martha's Tesla, a sweet 16 gift from her mother, sat in the driveway beside Sarah's empty parking spot. The house felt hollow, despite the expensive furnishings Sarah had insisted on adding over the years. He found Martha in the kitchen, textbooks spread across the granite island they'd installed last summer. Her headphones covered ears recently pierced with diamonds. Another gift from Sarah, though the credit card statement had come to him. Hey, kiddo. He tapped her shoulder. She jumped, yanking off her headphones. Dad, you scared me. Sorry. Thought we could grab dinner. Your mom's at a client meeting. Yes, a big deal. Martha's eyes slid away. I already ate. How's the college search going? Still interested in environmental science? Keeping options open. She gathered her books quickly. Emma's coming over to study. Is that okay? Of course. He watched her hurry upstairs, already texting. In his home office, Jonathan pulled up their family's financial records. Credit card charges at hotels he'd never visited. Restaurant bills in Chicago when Sarah claimed to be showing properties in Bellevue. Regular transfers to an account he didn't recognize, always just under the amount that would trigger a notification. His phone buzzed. Late meeting. Don't wait up. Left chicken in the fridge. Through the air vent came Martha's voice. No, Emma, I can't tonight. Mom's, meeting. Jonathan accessed the trust security logs. Wayne had logged into the financial system during last week's Portland fundraiser, when he'd claimed to be in court. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Sarah's phone GPS showed her at the Four Seasons Hotel downtown. The same hotel that appeared on last month's credit card statement, hidden among legitimate business expenses. Jonathan opened his bottom desk drawer, removing a bottle of Macallan 18 he saved for special occasions. As he poured 2 fingers, his father's words echoed from years ago. Son, when everything looks perfect, that's when you need to look closer. The old man's estate would be distributed next month. $7 million that Jonathan had earmarked for expanding the trust work. Now he wondered if that had been the trigger, the final piece his wife and best friend had been waiting for. He took a slow sip of scotch, letting the warmth spread through his chest. Through the vent, Martha's voice drifted down again, unaware of her audience below. 3 days later, Jonathan sat in his home office, a digital recorder ready on his desk. Martha's voice floated down through the air vent, sharp with teenage contempt. Dad's such an idiot, Emma. Mom's lover practically lives here during his business trips. Her laugh was cruel, unfamiliar. Wayne's got it all planned out. Once Dad's inheritance from Grandpa clears next month, they're moving us all to Chicago. Mom's already looking at houses on the Gold Coast. Jonathan's fingers remained steady as he adjusted the recorder's settings. His father's estate, nearly $7 million, would indeed be distributed soon. The old man had been proud when Jonathan left corporate law to protect endangered species, even as others called him foolish. Brad's helping them hide the money, Martha continued. Mom says Dad's too busy saving animals to notice what's happening right under his nose. Last week she sold the emerald necklace he got her for their anniversary. Told him it was stolen, and he totally bought it. Heavy footsteps sounded upstairs, too heavy for Emma. Brad's voice confirmed Jonathan's suspicion. Keep your voice down, Martha. The neighbors might hear. Uncle Brad, when did you get here? Just now. Your mom wanted me to check on you while she's out with Wayne. A pause. You remember the story if your dad asks about college, right? UW Environmental Science Program. I know. Play the daddy's girl who wants to follow in his footsteps. Martha's voice dripped with sarcasm. What about the trust? Mom said something about Wayne handling it. Wayne's got someone at the Chicago office who'll help move some assets once your dad signs the new account paperwork. Nothing too obvious. Just enough to fund your mom's fresh start. What about Dad? He'll be fine. The trust is real family anyway. Probably won't even notice you're gone. Too busy saving salmon or whatever. Jonathan's phone lit up with a text from Sarah, working late again. Don't forget Martha needs her college application fee tomorrow. The pieces assembled themselves into a clear picture. His wife, his best friend, his brother-in-law, and even his daughter, all conspiring while accepting his generosity. The perfect life he'd built was a carefully constructed illusion, now dissolving like morning fog over Puget Sound. He clicked off the recorder and opened his laptop. Time to start his own research, beginning with Wayne's legal credentials and working outward. Like tracking an invasive species through an ecosystem, he would follow the trail of destruction until he understood its full extent. The rain started again outside, drumming against the windows of the home he'd thought would shelter his family for generations. Now it felt like a stage set, populated by actors playing roles in a drama he hadn't known was unfolding. Martha's laughter echoed down again, accompanied by Brad's lower tones as they plotted his financial demise. Jonathan pulled up his banking app and began documenting transfer patterns, each entry another nail in the coffin of his perfect life. But unlike the endangered species he worked to protect, Jonathan Carlson wasn't about to become extinct. He was a predator who'd been playing at being prey, and now it was time to remind everyone why apex predators sat at the top of the food chain. He picked up his phone and began making notes. Tomorrow, he would start gathering evidence. But tonight, he would let them continue thinking he was oblivious. The foolish conservationist too focused on saving animals to notice the human predators circling ever closer. Upstairs, the conspirators continued their planning, unaware that their target had finally spotted the trap. Jonathan smiled, a cold expression that would have shocked those who knew him only as the passionate environmentalist. They'd forgotten that before he saved endangered species, he'd been one of Seattle's most ruthless corporate lawyers. It was time to remind them. The morning after overhearing Martha's conversation, Jonathan drove to work as if nothing had changed. The Seattle rain pelted his windshield, matching his dark mood. He pulled into his reserved spot at the Trust's office building, noting Wayne's BMW already present, unusually early for his typically late-rising friend. Inside his office, he found Kelly waiting with their usual morning briefing documents. She closed the door without being asked. "Mr. Carlson, about what I've been trying to tell you." Her hands twisted the tablet she carried. "I have dates, times, photographs." "Show me." Kelly pulled up a folder on her tablet. 2 years ago, during the Olympic Peninsula Preservation Project launch. That's when it started. She swiped through security camera stills, hotel receipts, time-stamped photos. They weren't careful at first. Thought no one was watching. "Tell me everything, Kelly." They meet 3 times a week, usually at the Four Seasons. Wayne books it under his corporate account, but bills it to the trust through convoluted expense reports I've been flagging. Her voice strengthened. "They've been embezzling, Mr. Carlton. Small amounts, scattered across different project budgets. I've documented transfers to an account in Chicago." Jonathan leaned back, expression neutral. "How long have you been gathering this?" "A year. I wasn't sure at first, but then I overheard them planning something about your father's inheritance." She met his eyes. "They thought I was just the quiet COO who wouldn't notice." "You done well, Kelly." Jonathan opened his laptop. "I need you to compile everything into a secure file. Use my private server, not the Trust network." "Already done?" She handed him an encrypted drive. "I also have recordings of Wayne accessing our financial systems during your Portland trip, when he claimed to be in court." "Court?" Jonathan's laugh held no humor. "Let's look into that." Over the next hour, they dug into Wayne's legal background. Jonathan's corporate law contacts proved invaluable, especially a former colleague now working for the Illinois Bar Association. "Jesus," Kelly whispered, reading the confidential report. "He was disbarred in Chicago 15 years ago. Multiple counts of fraud, client theft, falsifying documents, which he hid when applying for his Washington license." Jonathan's voice remained steady. "Sarah doesn't know. She thinks she's running away with a successful attorney." "What are you going to do?" "Nothing." At her startled look, he elaborated. "For now, we gather evidence. Every meeting, every transfer, every lie. We let them think they're succeeding. They're stealing from the trust, from your family. The trust is protected. I set up fail-safes years ago after that embezzlement scandal at the Wildlife Federation." Jonathan pulled up his calendar. "Now, we have a board meeting in 20 minutes. Act normal." The meeting proceeded like any other, with Wayne presenting financial reports. Jonathan watched him lie with practiced ease, noting how his best friend's smile never wavered while discussing the special accounts needed for new projects. Sarah called during lunch. "Honey, I need to extend my Chicago trip next week. The developer wants to show me more properties." "Of course," Jonathan replied pleasantly. "Martha can stay with me. Actually, Brad offered to watch her. You'll be busy with that new wildlife corridor project." "How thoughtful of my brother-in-law." After hanging up, Jonathan called a private investigator recommended by his Illinois contact. Within hours, they had surveillance teams in both Seattle and Chicago, tracking every movement, every meeting, every lie. The investigators' first report arrived that evening. Wayne had booked 2 first-class tickets to Chicago under his corporate account. The trust would receive an invoice for a non-existent legal conference. Jonathan worked late again, listening through the air vent as Martha packed for her weekend at Emma's. Actually a planned meeting with Sarah and Wayne in Chicago to view potential homes. The pieces were falling into place. His predators thought they were being clever, but they'd forgotten what Jonathan used to be before he turned his skills to conservation. Corporate law hadn't made him soft. it had taught him patience. Over the next month, Jonathan orchestrated his counter-strategy with surgical precision. Each morning began with a secure briefing from Kelly, reviewing overnight surveillance reports and financial traces. "They've moved another 50,000, Kelly reported one morning. Routed through 3 shell companies before landing in Chicago. Jonathan nodded, adjusting his strategy accordingly. "Have our accountants flag it as suspicious, but don't block it. Let them think they're succeeding." He'd already transferred the bulk of his assets to a new conservation trust, structured with ironclad legal protection against divorce proceedings. The paperwork, filed through a separate law firm in Oregon, would only become visible when he chose to reveal it. Martha's phone conversations provided a steady stream of intelligence. Jonathan had installed recording devices throughout the house, capturing every plot and scheme. "Mom says we'll have a view of Lake Michigan," Martha told Emma during one recorded call. "Wayne's found this amazing penthouse. Dad's inheritance will pay for everything." Jonathan documented it all while maintaining his public persona. He attended fundraisers, approved Wayne's suspicious financial requests, and kissed Sarah goodbye as she left for her frequent business trips. During one board meeting, Wayne grew particularly bold. "Jonathan, I've been looking into a unique investment opportunity in Chicago." Wayne's smile dripped confidence. "Perfect way to expand the trust's influence while generating significant returns." "Tell me more." "Luxury eco-development along the lake. Very exclusive." Wayne slid across a prospectus. "We need to move quickly. Say, $5 million initial investment." Jonathan studied the documents, noting how they'd been carefully crafted to appear legitimate while creating a legal backdoor for fund transfers. "Interesting proposal. Let me review it with our investment committee." "Time-sensitive opportunity," Wayne pressed. "We should move before your father's estate closes." "Of course." Jonathan smiled, watching his friend try to hide his eagerness. "I'll fast-track the review." After the meeting, he contacted Diana Chun, a former colleague now specializing in forensic accounting. She confirmed what he'd suspected. The investment structure was designed to siphon money through multiple shells before disappearing into untraceable accounts. The surveillance teams reported Sarah and Wayne meeting their Chicago real estate agent, touring luxury properties along the Gold Coast. Brad joined them for several viewings, playing his role in the conspiracy while continuing to accept Jonathan's generosity. Just last week, Brad had asked Jonathan to co-sign a business loan, claiming his real estate development company needed short-term capital. Jonathan agreed, knowing the money would help fund their escape plan. "You're a lifesaver," Brad had said, clapping him on the back. "Sarah's lucky to have such a generous husband." The betrayal ran deeper than mere infidelity. They'd worked for years to position themselves, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Jonathan's father's inheritance was meant to be their final score, the key to their new life in Chicago. They never suspected that Jonathan had already restructured the inheritance distribution through a series of conservation trusts, making it untouchable. "Mr. Carlson?" Kelly entered his office one afternoon. "I found something else." Wayne's been backdating legal documents, creating a paper trail to justify the fund transfers. "Perfect." Jonathan added it to his growing file. "How's the Chicago surveillance?" "They put an offer on a penthouse in Streeterville. $8 million. She hesitated. "Sarah's name isn't on any paperwork. It's all under Wayne's aliases." Jonathan allowed himself a cold smile. "He's planning to take everything, including my wife's escape fund. Let's see how loyal she remains when she discovers that." The chess game continued, each move carefully calculated. Jonathan attended charity events, praised Wayne's legal acumen, and listened patiently to Sarah's lies about her Chicago business meetings. He was building a trap that would not only protect his assets but destroy the conspirators with their own greed. As autumn faded into winter, Wayne's schemes grew increasingly ambitious. The Chicago investment opportunity had evolved into a complex web of proposed transactions, each designed to extract maximum funds before their planned disappearance. "The market's perfect right now," Brad announced during a family dinner, swirling his wine. "You should consider selling the house, Jonathan. I have buyers lined up." Sarah jumped in too quickly. "He's right, honey. With property values so high, we could make a fortune." "Interesting timing." Jonathan cut his steak methodically, just as Wayne's Chicago development needs investors. Pure coincidence. Wayne laughed, but his eyes darted to Sarah. Though it would be a prudent portfolio diversification, Martha pushed her food around her plate, unusually quiet. The surveillance equipment had caught her earlier conversation with Sarah. "Mom, are you sure about this? What if Dad figures it out?" "Your father sees what he wants to see," Sarah had replied. "Just keep playing the dutiful daughter for a few more weeks." Now Jonathan watched them perform their roles, noting every glance and hidden signal. The house of cards they'd built was magnificent in its complexity and utterly doomed. That evening, Wayne cornered him in his home office. "About that Chicago investment, we need to move quickly. I have all the paperwork ready." Jonathan reviewed the documents, admiring their craftsmanship. Every page was designed to appear legitimate, while creating fatal legal flaws that would only become apparent too late. "Impressive work, Wayne." He signed where indicated, using the special ink that would prove the documents were backdated. "When do we close?" "Next week. I'll handle everything." Wayne gathered the papers, practically glowing with triumph. "You won't regret this, Jonathan." "I'm sure I won't." After Wayne left, Jonathan connected with his team of investigators. The surveillance photos showed Wayne meeting with Sarah and Brad at a private club in Chicago, celebrating their apparent victory. "Won't be long now," Brad had said, raising his glass. "Jonathan's signing everything over tomorrow. By the time he realizes what's happened, we'll be gone." Sarah had laughed, running her hand along Wayne's arm. He always was too trusting, too focused on saving the world to notice what was happening at home. The recordings painted a perfect picture of conspiracy and fraud. Every document Wayne had created, every transfer Sarah had hidden, every lie Brad had told, all carefully archived and time-stamped. Jonathan's phone buzzed with a text from Martha. "Dad, can we talk about college? I'm having second thoughts about environmental science." He didn't reply. The surveillance team had already documented her real plans. Art history at the University of Chicago, funded by money they planned to steal from him. The next morning, Brad called with fake concern. "Jonathan, I've been reviewing your financial structures. Have you considered setting up a family trust? I know some excellent attorneys in Chicago. Thanks for looking out for me, Brad." Jonathan's voice gave nothing away. "Send me their information." The house of cards grew taller with each passing day. Wayne filed more fraudulent legal documents. Sarah consolidated her secret accounts. Brad positioned himself to profit from both sides. They thought they were architects of an elaborate deception. In reality, they were builders working with marked cards, every move documented and destined for exposure. Jonathan watched their confidence grow, their schemes expand, their dreams of wealth and escape take shape. Like the endangered species he worked to protect, they didn't see the trap until it was too late. The final pieces were in place. Tomorrow, they would try to spring their trap, never realizing they'd been the prey all along. In his office, Jonathan reviewed the evidence one last time. Everything was ready: the financial traces, the surveillance photos, the recorded conversations, the backdated documents. A lifetime of betrayal captured in pixels and paper. The rain beat against his windows as Seattle settled into another winter night. Somewhere in the city, his wife, best friend, and brother-in-law celebrated their imminent victory. Jonathan saved his files, encrypted his drives, and prepared for tomorrow. Unlike the endangered species he protected, these predators had chosen their fate. The house of cards was about to fall. On a crisp Monday morning in early December, Jonathan arrived at his office before dawn. The Seattle skyline was still dark, matching his mood as he reviewed the final preparations with his team. "All assets secured?" he asked Kelly, who had proven invaluable throughout the ordeal. "Everything's transferred to the new conservation trust." She handed him a folder. "The joint accounts are legally drained. The house is protected under the LLC, and the inheritance is locked behind ironclad conservation commitments." "Perfect." Jonathan checked his watch. Sarah's meeting Wayne for breakfast at 8 a.m. They're planning to finalize the Chicago property purchase today. The legal team he'd assembled waited in the conference room. Process servers stood ready at multiple locations. The press releases were prepared, timed for maximum impact. At precisely 8:15 a.m., Jonathan nodded to Kelly. The plan launched like a perfectly coordinated missile strike. Sarah was served with divorce papers over her smoked salmon Benedict at the Four Seasons. Wayne received his serving of criminal charges for practicing law without a license as he reached for the check. Simultaneously, Brad's employer got an anonymous package detailing his role in the conspiracy. By 8:30, security was escorting him from his office building, his personal items in a cardboard box. Jonathan watched the security feeds Kelly had arranged. Sarah's face transformed from confusion to rage as she read the divorce filing. Wayne's practice charm crumbled as he realized the extent of the criminal charges. "Mr. Carlson?" His assistant knocked. "The Seattle Times is on line 1. They're asking about Wayne Wall's disbarment and fraud conviction." "No comment at this time." Jonathan smiled coldly. "Though I believe Mr. Wall's former clients in Chicago might have something to say." His phone exploded with messages. "Sarah, what the hell do you think you're doing?" "Wayne, this is all a misunderstanding. Call me immediately." "Brad, you've made a huge mistake. We can explain everything." He ignored them all, watching as his plan unfolded. The press releases hit the local news. Prominent environmental lawyer exposed as fraud. Conservation Trust uncovers multi-million-dollar conspiracy. Sarah burst into his office at 9:45, still clutching the divorce papers. "You can't do this to me." "To us? I already have." Jonathan didn't look up from his computer. "You'll find your credit cards have been canceled. The joint accounts are empty, legally transferred to protect endangered species, of course. Your lover's Chicago penthouse dreams will need a new funding source." "You vindictive bastard." Her perfectly manicured hands shook. "I'll fight this. Wayne's the best lawyer in Seattle." "Wayne's not a lawyer at all." Jonathan finally met her eyes. "Check today's news. Your boyfriend lost his license 15 years ago for defrauding clients in Chicago. Everything he's done since then is illegal, including your planned property purchases." The color drained from Sarah's face as she grabbed her phone, scanning the headlines. "This is a lie. Wayne would never. Like he'd never sleep with his best friend's wife? Never embezzle from a conservation trust? Never plan to steal an inheritance meant to protect endangered species?" Jonathan's voice remained calm. "Security will escort you out. Don't bother going home. The locks are changed, and the house belongs to an Environmental Education LLC now." "What about Martha?" "She's my daughter. Martha's 18 next month. Old enough to choose where she lives and what she studies." He turned back to his work. "Though her trust fund now requires a 3.5 GPA in environmental science, not art history in Chicago." Security arrived to escort a screaming Sarah from the building, her threats of revenge echoing through the office. Jonathan continued working, responding to board members' concerns and press inquiries with practiced ease. By noon, Wayne's legal practice was shut down pending investigation. His clients fled as news of his fraudulent credentials spread. The Chicago property deal collapsed, taking Sarah's escape fund with it. Brad's reputation in Seattle real estate circles was destroyed. No one would touch him after his role in the conspiracy became public. Jonathan's phone buzzed again. Martha. He let it go to voicemail. She needed time to process how thoroughly her world had just changed. The weeks following Jonathan's strike brought a cascade of revelations and consequences. Martha, initially shell-shocked by the exposure of the conspiracy, found her carefully planned future crumbling. "Dad!" She stood in his home office doorway one evening, looking younger than her 17 years. "Can we talk?" "Come in." Jonathan set aside the trust documents he was reviewing. "I assume you have questions?" "Mom says you've ruined everything." Martha's voice wavered. "She says you're punishing everyone because you were jealous of her happiness with Wayne." "Interesting perspective." Jonathan pulled up a file on his computer. "Would you like to hear your own words about their plans? I have excellent recordings of you discussing how to deceive your idiot father while spending his money." Martha's face flushed. "You recorded me?" "I recorded everyone." He played a clip of her laughing about his ignorance. "While you were plotting my financial destruction, I was protecting your future. By forcing me to study environmental science? That's not protecting, that's controlling. Your trust fund comes from conservation work. It seems fitting that it supports conservation education." Jonathan's voice softened slightly. But the choice is yours. You're welcome to pursue art history. Just not with my money and not in Chicago. Martha's anger crumbled. Mom's living in a hotel. Wayne won't answer her calls since the fraud news broke. She says she's broke. Actions have consequences. Jonathan pulled up another file. Your mother and Wayne embezzled nearly $500,000 from joint accounts. They plan to steal millions more once my father's inheritance cleared. Now they're facing civil lawsuits and criminal charges. What about me? Your room here is exactly as you left it. You can stay, follow the trust fund conditions, and build an honest future. Or you can join your mother's downward spiral. Jonathan turned back to his work. Choose wisely. Sarah's descent continued spectacularly. Her real estate license was suspended pending investigation into her role in Wayne's fraudulent practice. Former clients filed complaints about properties purchased through illegitimate legal channels. Wayne's fall was even more dramatic. Former clients emerged with stories of mishandled funds and falsified documents. His carefully constructed facade crumbled under scrutiny, revealing decades of fraud. Mr. Carlson? Kelly appeared in his doorway one morning. Sarah's trying to access the Chicago property funds. She seems confused about why her passwords don't work. Send her the forensic accounting report. Jonathan didn't look up, the one showing how Wayne was planning to take that money for himself. Watching their dream of luxury collapse proved grimly satisfying. Sarah's savings vanished into legal fees. Wayne faced multiple criminal charges. Brad's real estate empire crumbled as partners fled the scandal. Martha spent Christmas break alternating between her father's house and Sarah's hotel room, witnessing the stark contrast between stability and chaos. She wanted me to ask you for money, Martha admitted one evening. Said if I played on your fatherly feelings. And what did you tell her? That she'd used me enough already. Martha studied her hands. I've been looking at UW's environmental science program. Their marine biology track is actually interesting. Jonathan nodded, satisfied that at least one person was learning from the disaster. 1 year later, Jonathan stood at a podium in the Seattle Convention Center, addressing the National Conservation Leadership Summit. Ethics in environmental work isn't just about protecting ecosystems, he told the packed room. It's about preserving trust. When we betray that trust, we destroy more than relationships. We damage the very causes we claim to serve. The audience sat riveted. His story had become a case study in ethical leadership, turning personal betrayal into institutional strength. The trust had emerged stronger, its financial controls now a model for nonprofit governance. Jonathan's conservation work expanded nationally, with new projects launching across the West Coast. Martha sat in the front row, her UW Environmental Sciences notebook open. She'd surprised everyone, perhaps even herself, by discovering a genuine passion for marine conservation. Your father's speech was impressive, Kelly told her afterward, though I suspect he enjoyed the irony of using Wayne's scandal to promote ethical leadership. Dad's good at turning disasters into opportunities. Martha smiled wryly. Unlike Mom and Wayne, Sarah and Wayne's Chicago dreams had dissolved into legal nightmares. Wayne faced multiple fraud charges, his decades of deception finally catching up. Sarah's attempts to restart her real estate career failed as her role in the scandal followed her. Brad scraped by on small-time real estate deals, his reputation permanently tainted. The former conspirators avoided each other now, their grand plans replaced by recriminations and regret. Any word from your mother? Jonathan asked Martha over dinner that evening. She's still in Chicago. Martha poked at her salmon, working as a receptionist at some strip mall real estate office. Wayne's lawyers are bleeding her dry. Jonathan nodded, unsurprised. He'd known Sarah's fate the moment he discovered Wayne's true past. Like many predators, Wayne had never intended to share his prey. The betrayal had cleansed Jonathan's life of false relationships, leaving only authentic connections. His work flourished, expanding into international conservation efforts. The Trust's ethical leadership program, inspired by Wayne's scandal, gained national recognition. Martha thrived in her marine biology studies, her previous artistic talents finding expression in scientific illustration. She'd chosen to stay with Jonathan, recognizing the stability he offered. "You never seemed angry," she said one evening, watching the sunset over Puget Sound. "Even when you knew what we were planning." Anger clouds judgment. Jonathan sipped his coffee. "I preferred clarity." That clarity had served him well. While Sarah and Wayne faced mounting legal troubles in Chicago, Jonathan's influence in conservation circles grew. He'd transformed personal betrayal into professional triumph, never looking back at the wreckage he'd left behind. The rain started again, a typical Seattle evening. Jonathan watched the drops pattern his office window, remembering the night he'd first overheard Martha's phone call. The perfect life he'd thought he had turned out to be an illusion. Its replacement, built on the ashes of betrayal, proved far more authentic and fulfilling than the lie he'd lived before. Epilogue. 5 years after the scandal that shook Seattle's environmental conservation community, Jonathan Carlson stood at the window of his expanded office in the Trust's new headquarters. The view of Puget Sound stretched before him, pristine waters protected by his organization's tireless work. At 50, his success had only grown, turning personal betrayal into professional triumph. The Seattle Times article on his desk told the latest chapter in his former wife's downfall. Former real estate agent Sarah Carlson faces new fraud charges. The story detailed her desperate attempt to forge documents in a Chicago real estate scam, trying to rebuild the luxury life she'd lost. Her fall from grace had been spectacular and continuous. "Dad?" Martha's voice came from the doorway. Now 22, and in her final year at the University of Washington, she'd grown into a poised young woman. Her marine biology research on salmon conservation had already earned recognition in academic circles. "More bad news about Mom?" She gestured at the newspaper. "She never learned." Jonathan shook his head, still chasing shortcuts. The past 5 years had carved harsh lessons into all the conspirators' lives. Sarah, stripped of her real estate license, had bounced between low-paying jobs in Chicago. Her attempts to rebuild her career failed repeatedly as background checks revealed her role in Wayne's fraud. The designer clothes and luxury lifestyle she dreamed of were replaced by a studio apartment in a declining neighborhood. Wayne's fate proved even more satisfying. The investigation into his fraudulent law practice uncovered decades of deception. Former clients emerged with stories of mishandled funds and falsified documents. He now resided in a federal prison in Illinois, serving an 8-year sentence for multiple counts of fraud and practicing law without a license. "I saw Uncle Brad last week," Martha said, settling into a chair. "He's selling used cars in Tacoma. Tried to pitch me a special deal on a beat-up Honda." Brad's fall had been less dramatic, but equally complete. No legitimate real estate firm would touch him after his role in the conspiracy became public. His development company collapsed, taking his reputation and savings with it. He scraped by on increasingly desperate schemes, a shadow of his former arrogant self. Kelly appeared with their morning briefing documents. Now the Trust's executive director, she'd proven invaluable in rebuilding after the scandal. "The National Conservation Council approved our expansion proposal," she reported. "They specifically cited our ethical leadership program as a model for the industry." Jonathan smiled at the irony. The program he'd built from Wayne's betrayal had transformed the Trust into a leader in nonprofit governance. Environmental organizations across the country now sent staff to learn from their example. "Have you seen the latest from Chicago?" Kelly handed him another newspaper clipping. Wayne had attempted to appeal his conviction, claiming Sarah had masterminded the fraud. The courts disagreed, adding 2 years to his sentence for perjury. Sarah, enraged by his betrayal, had retaliated by providing prosecutors with evidence of additional crimes. "They deserve each other," Martha observed. "Remember how they used to talk about their perfect life in Chicago? Mom sent me another email begging for money last week. Said she's facing eviction." Jonathan remembered Sarah's confident smirk when she'd planned to steal his inheritance. Now she lived on Social Security in a rundown apartment, her dreams of luxury permanently shattered. The karmic justice felt appropriate. The Trust's annual fundraiser approached, now the premier environmental event in the Pacific Northwest. Jonathan had transformed it from a local gathering into a national showcase for conservation leadership. This year's theme: building trust through ethical action. Martha's contribution to the event highlighted the trust's future. Her research project on salmon breeding grounds, the very initiative that had marked the beginning of the betrayal, now promised breakthrough findings in species preservation. Sometimes I wonder if they regret it, Martha mused. Not the getting caught part. The throwing away everything real for a fantasy part. Jonathan considered this. Sarah and Wayne had sacrificed genuine relationships and respected careers for their illicit dreams. Now they lived in separate prisons. Wayne's made of steel bars, Sarah's built from consequences. Their Chicago penthouse dreams had dissolved into legal nightmares. The money they'd embezzled was gone, devoured by attorney fees and restitution orders. Sarah's secret account, discovered during the divorce, had been seized to repay defrauded clients. The trust's legal team still occasionally fielded desperate appeals from Wayne's prison cell or Sarah's latest attorney. Each attempt to reclaim some fragment of their former lives failed, adding to their mounting legal costs. Jonathan's new life flourished in stark contrast. The trust's international expansion included projects across 3 continents. His ethical leadership lectures packed university auditoriums. Environmental organizations sought his guidance on governance and leadership. Mr. Carlson? His assistant interrupted. The governor's office is confirming your appointment to the State Environmental Commission. Life had moved forward, leaving the betrayers behind. Martha excelled in her studies, combining her artistic talents with scientific rigor in marine biology. Her relationship with Sarah dwindled to occasional unanswered emails begging for financial help. Kelly had married last year, with Jonathan giving her away at a ceremony overlooking the same salmon breeding grounds that started everything. The trust staff had grown to over 100 dedicated conservationists, their work expanding far beyond the Pacific Northwest. The annual audit arrived, showing record donations and impact metrics. Jonathan remembered Wayne's complex schemes to siphon money from these accounts. Now those same funds protected endangered species across the globe, while Wayne counted days in federal prison. Sarah's latest mugshot showed the toll of 5 years' consequences. The designer clothes and perfect makeup were replaced by hollow eyes and bitter lines. Her new fraud charges carried a potential 5-year sentence, longer than her marriage would last. The Seattle Conservation Society called, Kelly mentioned. They want you to keynote their leadership conference. Apparently, your story about maintaining ethical principles through personal betrayal really resonates. Jonathan's phone buzzed with a text from Martha. Mom tried adding me on LinkedIn. Her profile lists her as CEO of a fake investment firm. Some things never change. The betrayers had taught him valuable lessons about trust and authenticity. Their destruction served as a case study in consequences, their shattered dreams a warning to others who might choose similar paths. Outside his office window, a boat crossed the Sound, its wake spreading across protected waters. Like those ripples, the impact of betrayal and justice had transformed everyone it touched. Some, like Wayne and Sarah, drowned in the consequences. Others, like Jonathan and Martha, rode the waves to stronger shores. 5 years had proven that karma worked through legal channels, that justice came through patience and preparation, that authenticity outlasted deception. The betrayers had lost everything they plotted to steal, while their intended victim grew stronger from their destruction. Jonathan closed the newspaper, consigning Sarah's latest disgrace to the recycling bin. In the end, the most fitting punishment was simply letting them live with the consequences of their choices, watching from afar as they drowned in the wreckage of their own betrayal. The Trust's next board meeting would start soon. Unlike the days of Wayne's deceptions, it would focus on genuine conservation work, protecting endangered species, preserving habitats, building ethical legacies. Martha gathered her research materials, headed to another semester of studying the marine life her father's work protected. Her mother's art history dreams had given way to a genuine passion for science and conservation. Dinner tonight? She asked from the doorway. Emma's in town. She'd love to hear about Mom's latest legal troubles. Jonathan smiled. Even Emma, Martha's high school confidant in the conspiracy, had grown wiser. She now worked for the Trust's education program, teaching children about environmental protection. The betrayers had meant to destroy him. Instead, they'd stripped away false relationships, leaving only authentic connections. Their greed had strengthened his mission. Their deception had proven the value of integrity. 5 years later, justice still played out in monthly court appearances and daily consequences. Wayne marked time in prison while Sarah chased impossible schemes. Brad sold used cars to wary customers, his smooth talk now met with skepticism. Jonathan reviewed the trust's latest expansion plans, his legacy growing while theirs crumbled. Sometimes the best revenge was simply succeeding, letting karma handle the rest through garnished wages and prison sentences. The rain started again, a typical Seattle afternoon. In Chicago, Sarah probably watched similar rain through barred windows, awaiting her fraud trial. In federal prison, Wayne marked another day of his sentence, his legal expertise useless behind bars. Jonathan turned back to his work, leaving the betrayers to their fate. He had endangered species to protect, ethical principles to uphold, authentic relationships to nurture. Their betrayal had taught him valuable lessons about trust and justice. The price of betrayal continued to compound daily in garnished wages, legal fees, and lost opportunities. Meanwhile, its intended victim thrived, proving that karma worked best through careful preparation and lawful channels. The betrayers had destroyed themselves, leaving Jonathan to build something genuine from the wreckage of their deception. 5 years later, that felt like the most appropriate justice of all. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.